Happy Monday evening, afternoon, whatever it is. You're watching the box office report with Mr. Dan Murrell. I'm Roth Cornet, and we are going to talk a little bit about Dracula.
Yes. Good weekend for Dracula. Very good weekend for Dracula.
I believe in Hotel Transylvania 3. He is a vampire, but I do not know that he is, in fact, Dracula.
I have caught up on the Hotel Transylvania series. I did. I watched all two of them and the new one. He is, in fact, the Count Dracula in this series. So I had that question answered for me. And he's also number one at the box office because Hotel Transylvania 3 opened to $44 million. That's the third straight $40+ million opening for that franchise. They took a little bit of a risk because the other ones opened in September. They were fall movies. They moved to the summer. And no drop-off thus far. We'll see how it legs out against, probably tougher competition than it had, but
drink your apple juice.
Drink your apple juice. But good for Sony. Last year, their animated film was the Emoji Movie. It opened $20 million lower than Hotel Transylvania 3 did. So a better summer so far for Sony Pictures Animation. And, the big question here with Hotel Transylvania is, can it hold like Incredibles 2 has held? No, but percentage-wise. Not obviously money-wise, but percentage-wise.
Percentage-wise, maybe. I mean, it's a very popular franchise. He likes to suck your pocketbooks. So
he does.
We'll see how it does. Let's look how that's stacking up against Sony Pictures Animation
in general, now Hotel Transylvania holds the three biggest openings in Sony Animation history. Hotel Transylvania 2 opened higher. The original Hotel Transylvania opened lower, so this one falls right in the middle. And then at 4 and 5, you've got Angry Birds and Sausage Party, which are actually two summer 2016 releases in the top 5. So it looks like Sony, they had a couple of hit movies, but now with this one opening well, they may have found, for them at least, what DreamWorks had with Shrek and How to Train Your Dragon, what Universal obviously has with the Despicable Me Minions series, any number of Disney Pixars, but, a dependable franchise, hopefully, for them. Fox had one with Ice Age for a while that they can count on to deliver some money because they've been a little up and down.
They have been a little bit up and down. And you know what? It's funny because as we were looking at those films, I was thinking, what an interesting mix. And and you got to give it to Sony because they will take risks. But a studio like that, especially in this marketplace, it's going to be harder and harder to take risks unless they do have some of those sort of pillars that they can count on. So I hope it does work out for them. There are other films in theaters this weekend, notably The Rock. It's disappointing. The Rock's doing his Die Hard, and I went to see him punch a building.
Yeah, but not everybody did. Skyscraper, well below expectations, under $25 million. This is a film that's budgeted over $125 million. That's even a bigger budget than Rampage, which opened bigger domestically than this movie, Skyscraper, did. And even Rampage could not crack the $100 million mark. Now, Rampage was to a large degree bailed out by what it did in foreign markets. The Rock is a huge international star. We're going to talk about The Rock a little more in depth in a little bit, but that's where they're going to shift the eyes now. If you're looking at Skyscraper, you're hoping for a huge boost from China next weekend. Skyscraper got a release in China this weekend, which is rare because they're kind of in their blackout period where it's mainly just Chinese films at the box office, but The Rock is a huge star there. Skyscraper brought in about $40 million from the markets that it opened in this last weekend, which is not overly impressive, really, considering the number of markets that it was in and combined with the low debut here. So more even than Rampage, Skyscraper is really going to have to look for the foreign box office to get bailed out. But unless China's return is phenomenal, this could be another kind of misstep for The Rock.
Which is pretty interesting. We will talk more about that in a minute. And certainly on its heels, we're coming up on Mission Impossible. So there's still a number of big summer films to come. Ant-Man and the Wasp is hanging in there a little bit.
A little bit. But, again, we spoke last week about how it was one of the lowest opening films in the MCU, probably because they had not really been featured. Ant-Man was in Civil War, but it's not a character that was given a premiere spot in an Avengers film like you've seen with some of the other characters that have kind of spun off. But even Doctor Strange, it didn't really open to that degree. Well, looking at its second weekend, it dropped 61% in its second weekend. That's the second worst drop-off for any MCU movie ever. It only trails Spider-Man Homecoming, which dropped about 62% as it competed with War for the Planet of the Apes in its second weekend. So and opened much higher. Homecoming opened to 117 million, which is far above what Ant-Man and the Wasp opened. So you look at the debut last weekend, which was on the upper end of expectation, but didn't blow the expectation away. And then now a 61% drop in its second weekend does not bode well for the fact that it's going to have a huge life at the box office. Dropped off more than all but one other MCU film percentage-wise in its second weekend. Again, and we talked about this, it is going to have to raise some questions at Marvel over the viability of this as its standalone franchise.
Oh, I'm sure they're having those conversations right now. And Marvel's been so successful elsewhere. I think it just becomes, and we like we said earlier, it probably will become one of those things where these characters get folded in as part of the larger tapestry in the big group films, but there probably won't be very more. I liked it enough, and I liked the Wasp enough that I wanted to see more of her. It's a little bit of a disappointment, but I also understand it's a very odd film to have placed directly after Infinity War.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that's the reason, but I do believe that that is a contributing factor in sort of the lessened appetite. People are just waiting for the continuation of that story at this point.
And the fourth Marvel film in less than a year.
Yeah.
With Ragnarok, Black Panther, Infinity War, and now Ant-Man and the Wasp. I don't know. I don't think that played as much into it just because those are four very different films.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, it is also like the fourth Marvel film in as many, less than a year. So maybe that played something into it, or maybe it's, just that it's a harder sell as a franchise. Yeah. Who
they
knows?
don't have an appetite for it. But they do have still an ongoing an appetite for those Incredibles.
They do. And in fact, this is another one of those weird anomalies of the number. If you look at Jurassic World 2 and Incredibles 2, remember last week we were talking about how they were in second and third place and they made almost identical amounts of money. For the second week in a row, they made almost identical amounts of money, just tens of thousands of dollars apart. But Incredibles 2 continues to stay in the top 5. It has now bypassed both Rogue One and The Dark Knight, which opened 10 years ago this week, Roth. It has now become the 9th biggest domestic grosser of all time. I think that we talked about how much money The Incredibles 2 was going to make. But
I believe we said buckets and barrels and truckloads.
Buckets and barrels and truckloads. But absent, depending on who you ask, for people that don't count Infinity War as a summer movie, we have chosen to here, as we mentioned before. But, this would be number one with a bullet in any other summer, minus Infinity War.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it was something that a friend of mine and I were talking about even months and months and months ago, just because, I think this is a good film. Obviously, audiences liked it, critics responded to it, but I think there really is an affinity for The Incredibles. And if it would have taken a really, truly bad film, which Pixar almost never does, to dampen it, but this is wildly successful for them. It does bode the question about what they will do with these characters in the future.
It does. Yeah.
Brad Bird on board or not. There's a little movie called 8th Grade, quite a delight. I am told. I haven't had the opportunity to see it yet.
It made its own splash this weekend from A24 and the comedian Bo Burnham, who a lot of people know from YouTube and elsewhere. Scored the best per screen debut of the year on just 4 screens, $65,000, almost $66,000 on 4 screens. Critics have gone nuts for this film. Its star, Elsie Fisher, has gotten a huge amount of buzz around this. Obviously, as it goes wider, some people comparing it to Lady Bird from last year, which also opened on 4 screens, opened higher. It opened about 90K, but it also had a much bigger rollout, a much bigger marketing push. But this is a little film that's really getting a lot of buzz here in the midsummer, which you see sometimes. You'll see these movies pop. The Big Sick was a summer film that ended up popping and went on to score Oscar nominations and a lot of awards buzz. So.
Well, we are knee deep in Comic-Con planning around here, but I have this earmarked as the thing that I'm going to treat myself to post Comic-Con as something little something for me.
And it should also be noted that last week's per screen winner, Sorry to Bother You, expanded to over 800 theaters, and it expanded well. Cracked the top 10, banked $4.2 million. I know that Boots Riley was very active on social media, very active, saying that he thought the movie had something to prove. It did well, especially for a movie as unique as that one, just stylistically, thematically, tonally. As it continues to expand, I'm very curious to see. It didn't open in quite enough theaters to see what something like CinemaScore would have to say, but I think this would probably be a movie that would have a low cinema score because people go in expecting something else.
Yeah, it definitely would. Look, this is a movie that I named as one of the best films of 2018 so far on a ScreenJunkies show, and we've talked about around here a little bit, but I highly recommend seeing the film. It is very unique, and it's certainly not for everyone. It's not the kind of popcorn film going experience that maybe you sometimes crave, but I think it's well worth seeing, and I'm glad to see it's doing well. But I absolutely agree it would likely have a low cinema score because it is so unusual. Yeah. You know what else is not that unusual and that people love to go to see at the movies is big action films.
Yeah.
And you did something where you compared one of today's biggest action stars, if not the biggest, in The Rock.
Yeah.
And one of yesteryear's, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and sort of the trajectory of their career. And there's a little thesis here about The Rock.
Yeah, I wanted to dig into it because, as I mentioned, domestically now, this is his second movie this year that has been a disappointment financially. As I mentioned, Rampage, a huge budgeted movie, didn't crack $100 million domestically. Did well overseas. That might be enough to carry it through to at least turn a little bit of a profit. And now Skyscraper, another movie, opened even lower than Rampage in the summer season, not in the spring, but that again is really going to have to rely on foreign grosses, if anything, to break even. And it got me thinking about The Rock, because we've talked about this for a long time. The Rock had this reputation as not being able to carry a film, and then he's kind of exploded into this worldwide superstar, and yet it seems like now 2 times in a row he's kind of been given his own film, and here in the US at least has not really carried that. And I wanted to kind of break down, you know me, I love the numbers. I love to contextualize everything with numbers. I love to kind of break down. So I wanted to look at The Rock in comparison to somebody else. And the closest comparison that I could think of, and I did some research online, he is compared, and I think there are comparisons, to Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Sure.
In the sense that
they're both athletes.
They're both athletes turned actors. And I think they both have, they're both sort of sold on their personality. Yeah. Arnold was Arnold, and you sold a movie based on Arnold. Much in the same way that I think you sell a movie about The Rock based on Dwayne Johnson, the guy first.
And it's weird because Arnold kind of was, as an actor, a heel and then a baby face, and then The Rock similarly, and he was like a heel and then a baby face, I think, in wrestling too. So yeah, there's some good comparisons there. They're both massive humans. And
honestly, I think that's a career that The Rock is probably aspiring to, in the sense of Arnold was, particularly in this heyday in the 90s, a very positive figure. He, the President's Counselor for Fitness, for physical fitness. He was a hero to a lot of kids, and he headlined a lot of very successful action franchises and was a very beloved figure in much the same way that I think The Rock is. So I wanted to kind of look at their careers and see, how do they compare, especially with hits versus misses. And so basically what I did was I took all of their grosses. So this is over Arnold's whole career, and this is to The Rock's career up to this point. Now, and this will be part of kind of what I look at with The Rock. They've made almost the exact same number of films, only The Rock has been doing it for not nearly as long as Arnold has. He just makes a lot more movies than Arnold has made over the course of his career. But I kind of broke it down into, and I don't want to get too caught up in the terminology. I just needed to name it something. Basically, movies that made over 3 times their budget, which is, a runaway hit. Yeah. Movies that are like 2 to 3 times their budget, that's a success. I think a disappointment would be something that doesn't, we talk about budget times 2 as kind of the standard. So a disappointment would be something that doesn't quite get to double its budget. And then a flop would be something that makes its budget or less. Yeah. And I wanted to break that down kind of by the numbers. So here's the chart, Schwarzenegger and The Rock. If you look at their how they compare, The Rock has had more movies and a higher percentage of his filmography triple its budget or more. He has had the same amount of movies, and again, a higher percentage of his filmography be successes, meaning they make 2 to 3 times his budget. And percentage-wise, he's had fewer letdowns and fewer flops than Arnold has over his career. So why is the perception sort of that Arnold is this big star while The Rock is struggling? Well, again, if you look underneath that first asterisk there, of Arnold's 10 biggest hits, 8 of those were what I call showcase or solo films. And what I mean is that not that he was in them alone, but they're movies like the first 2 Terminator films, Predator, Total Recall, True Lies, Conan the Barbarian. These are movies that were marketed based off of Arnold Schwarzenegger is the selling point. He's the lead. This is his franchise. He's the character. He's the guy. If you look at The Rock, on the other hand, look at the number of movies. Of his 12 biggest hits, only 4 of his were what I call showcase or solo films, in the sense that you are selling The Rock. This is like San Andreas, for example. That's a movie that The Rock is carrying. And the others were more ensemble pieces.
Fast and the Furious.
The Fast and the Furious
Jumanji.
franchise. Central Intelligence with Kevin Hart, where he's teamed with Kevin Hart. Much like Schwarzenegger's team with Danny DeVito for Twins. And that's not a height joke. That just happens to be a weird coincidence between the two of them. Jumanji. Movies like that where The Rock is maybe the lead of the ensemble or a part of the ensemble, but it's not a Rock movie.
Standout. He's often the like in the Fast and the Furious, he didn't come in to be the lead of that ensemble. He came in to play off of that and play with them, but he was a standout, and then he's grown and grown, and the franchise is built. It's not built around him, but he's certainly an integral part of it by now.
But it's not, he's a big part of it, but you're selling the Diesel, you're selling family, you're selling Coronas. Any number of things. They're definitely selling a lot of Coronas. He may lead the ensemble, but it's not his movie.
And Jumanji, Jack Black for me was really the
Jack Black was a great linchpin. And that again was sold as Kevin Hart, The Rock, Jack Black. Karen Gillan, kind of like that lead quartet was sort of what it was sold on. So I think that's part of the perception, is that The Rock has had more big, huge hits. However, he hasn't been the sole kind of carrying the load in as many as Arnold has. Arnold's huge hits were starring Arnold. He was the guy. He was the standout. He was the main character. He was the lead. If you look at that graphic again, even if you average domestic gross adjusted, The Rock slightly outdoes Schwarzenegger. Average worldwide gross, and that's a little misleading just because The Rock has modern dollars in his favor, whereas Arnold didn't. Plus, the worldwide market is much bigger than it was when Arnold. But obviously, The Rock has an advantage there with the worldwide gross. They have almost an exact number of $100 million plus grossing domestic films when you adjust for inflation. So dollar-wise, these guys have a very similar career, but I think the perception certainly is that Arnold is a bigger action star on his own than The Rock is.
I think the perception, the common perception is that if The Rock is in a movie on his own, it is more likely to not be good. I think that is starting to become the going perception, and it's really simple math, Dan. He should do movies that are with better directors, with better scripts.
Yeah.
It's like...
Well, and the other kind of math is, I think he also does so many movies right now that, for example, when you think about The Rock right now, you think about Skyscraper and you think about Rampage, which are two disappointments. We forget that just this January, he was leading the way on a film that did massively well.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I looked at, which is that Arnold Schwarzenegger never appeared in more than 2 films in 1 year. Not once in his career. Since 2013, The Rock has appeared in 3 or more films twice in 1 year, and he's had 2 films per year every year with the exception of 2014. So success-wise, they're about the same. Schwarzenegger made fewer movies. He spread them out further so that if it was a flop, you forgot about it. If it was a hit, it had a long time to stay in the memory. And The Rock does so many movies that I think that if they don't do well, they kind of stack up, and it's this thing like, what's wrong with The Rock? And if they do well, you forget about it because he's pushing the next film and pushing the next film.
The problem is people started to call him after the Fast and the Furious, and this is a little unfair because narratives also get created for these actors very quickly. Franchise Viagra. Do you remember?
G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe and all of this. And certainly the Fast and the Furious. And so the problem with that is the expectation becomes, if you're not launching a franchise or if you don't have a mega hit on your hands, then you have failed. And he's doing so many films, and not every film is going to be a massive hit. I think he's starting to pare back how much he promotes films that he doesn't think are going to be a massive hit, though, which I think is smart on his part. I don't know. Do you think there's something to the charm of Arnold that's different than what The Rock offers?
I think there's a mystique to it, and I think the difference between them isn't so much in performance. I think dollars and cents wise, The Rock is box office wise, the movies that he's in as big a draw or bigger than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think it's a perception issue. I think that because Arnold weathered flops in his career, he had plenty of them. He had Junior. He had Last Action Hero. He had a lot of movies, but they were spaced out further, and he had bigger hits that he could own. I'll be back. Hasta la vista. That was Arnold. That was that you remembered him from those movies, not necessarily, oh, that great cast. Oh, that great scene. So I think for The Rock, really, when you look at him, you kind of have to either adjust your perception of, like, yes, he's a big star, but he operates in these ensembles so that, he's just going to shoulder more of the blame if he fails at one of these movies, because his successes, he doesn't get to own 100% in the same way.
Look at the marketing for Skyscraper.
Yeah.
It's The Rock and a fire.
Right.
What are you going to blame the fire?
Yeah.
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 So, but it was on his shoulders.
It was on his shoulders. So when it fails, he gets the sole blame.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he does not get sole credit for a movie like Furious 7 or any of the Fast movies.
But to be fair, and I love The Rock, he shouldn't get the sole credit because it's not his movie. It's a team movie.
It's a difference in career choices. And I think when you're looking at The Rock versus Schwarzenegger, or really The Rock versus any of these kind of old school action guys, that's what you have to look at, is that he has chosen to operate in a lot of ensembles, whereas those guys did not. And I think that's why there is this perception that he has difficulty carrying movies. It's not so much that he is not a star or that he's on the decline. It's just that his hits tend to be franchise hits. And if he really, I think, wants to come into his own, it's like you said, for his solo movies, he's going to have to, I think, number one, take fewer projects.
Yeah.
Just because you want to
nurture them.
And you want to let a hit breathe. You don't want people to forget about the hit you just had because you're just doing another movie.
Yeah.
And number two, I think that he is going to want to look for a really solid solo project for himself that is going to let him live in the mindset of somebody the way that Arnold did with Terminator and Terminator 2 and Predator, so that you have a great cast around you. You've got Robert Patrick or Linda Hamilton, Carl Weathers, Jesse Ventura. You have these great characters surrounding you, but people think of you when they think of that movie. And I think that's where The Rock is lagging a little bit behind Arnold, and why he might not be considered one of these big action stars in his own right.
It'll be interesting to see how that unfolds over the next couple of years, because if you're also naming movies, I mean, look who Arnold was working with. He was working with James Cameron.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's like he knew exactly how to use him.
Yeah.
In that movie. And he knew how to use him in Terminator, and he knew how to change how he was using him in Terminator 2, which not everybody agreed with.
Yeah.
But that's James Cameron's brilliance. So he really needs, less so than to shepherd them himself, because that's okay if that's not his skill set.
Right. And he's a very insular guy, particularly with his solo projects. He likes to go to the directors that he knows, the producing team that he knows, the writers that he knows. Maybe he can try to turn to somebody, a talent outside of that circle that can maybe put together a project like that.
And create a relationship, and just go and get a very, very, very talented director to sort of create something for him. I think the other thing, too, is who The Rock is as an on-screen persona isn't as crystallized as it was for Schwarzenegger. In other words, like, who The Rock is, which is, he's an actor. It's not that there can't be any variance, but...
Right.
You expect, when I see Hobbs in the Fast and the Furious, I know he's going to be giving me one-liners, and I want them.
Right.
I sort of get the charm. I understand what that's going to be. You get him into some of these other projects, and it's like he's not clear if he's embodying Bruce Willis or Schwarzenegger. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
And
who is he?
Who is he? And so you're a Schwarzenegger. You're not a Bruce Willis, because you're not an everyman.
Right. No.
Like,
my God, no.
You can only like do it. The charm worked for Schwarzenegger when it was like juxtapotion.
Right.
Look at this massive,
DeVito,
huge man
kids.
with kids in these situations where everything's so much smaller than him. And I think, I mean, not literally, but like, I feel like he needs to find that essence of who he is as an on-screen persona.
Yeah, and he's had some success with that before.
He's great. He's obviously doing fine.
Yeah. So, overall conclusion, I think, would be that I think the reason he's perceived the way that he is because he doesn't own as many of the successes as he does his failures. And he is a massive star. It's just that he operates in a different way than a guy like Schwarzenegger did. So
it'll be interesting to see where he goes from here.
I'm curious to see where he goes from here. I would love to see him team up with a James Cameron type.
Who would that even be now?
I don't know who that would be right now, but I would love to see that. I think that'd be great.
Let us know in the comments below who's like the amazing action film director right now.
Yeah.
Like, who's that voice? Domestic top 10.
Let's look at the 2018 domestic top 10. This is the top 10 movies of the year. Here at the North American box office. Ocean's 8 drops down a notch. It also kicks Peter Rabbit out because Ant-Man and the Wasp is $133 million in 2 weeks. Most people wouldn't bat an eye at that, no matter how it stands against the other Marvel films. That jumps in at number 9, soon to pass Ready Player One. We'll see if we can get up to A Quiet Place. I don't know. Again, we'll see if it's got another $40-ish million. It might. Yeah. It might. I don't know. We'll see where it lands. But that's the only motion here on the domestic chart. Worldwide, that chart did not change this week. Solo gets a second week there. However, it is going to be probably knocked off next week by the film we discussed last week, Dying to Survive, which continues to be a huge hit in China. But there's another story that came out of China that I thought was really interesting this past weekend. A huge miss, much bigger than Skyscraper or anything that happened here. There's a Chinese film called Asura. This was billed as the most expensive Chinese film ever made, a budget of over $100 million. This was supposed to kick off a Lord of the Rings style epic franchise in China, the biggest sort of, for them, domestic effort in the film industry that's ever been made. It opened to just $7 million this weekend, which would be bad on its own, but we've spoken about how different the Chinese film market is from ours and how short the window is on releases. They also do things like this, which is late on Sunday night, the studio announced that the movie was pulled. It's gone. You can't see it. It opened so low that they pulled the film from theaters, supposedly to retool it and make some changes for a re-release. We'll see if that happens.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, at this point, it may just be
saving face,
the egg on the face. Kind of wiping the egg off your face. But this is akin to, imagine if Fellowship of the Ring had been made, bombed, and then on the Sunday night of its opening weekend, Peter Jackson announced and New Line announced that we're pulling it from theaters. It's analogous to what happened with this movie in China this weekend.
That's amazing. I mean, one part of me wonders, and I don't know how the financials work there, but almost for a studio here, we've talked about this before, it's worse for them to break even than to have a definitive flop because of how they can or cannot write that off.
Yeah, write downs.
In terms of the pay, you know what I mean? So curious. That's we'll see if it does in fact get a re-release.
If it doesn't make a comeback, it will go down as one of the biggest failures in movie history. Behind, and I was looking at the chart, Monster Trucks.
Oh, yeah.
Lost over $100 million for Paramount. That is insane. King Arthur is up there also from last year. But, it just goes to show you. Flops, no country, no border, no language.
You're going to get a hit, you can get a flop anywhere in the world.
Big miss for Asura over in China.
This is the odd part. I now want to see it.
I know, right?
Summer movie, I really do. Summer movie report.
Looking at the summer movie report, Tag jumps into the top 10. That's going to get bumped out by Hotel Transylvania next week, but it enjoys one little week there at number 10.
It deserves a little moment in the sun.
Yeah, it does. You know what? Looking at it, it could actually jump over Life of the Party maybe by itself a little bit of time, but it's not going to be on the final list. Overboard, which has been with us since the very beginning of the summer, gets knocked off the list. And as we mentioned, Ant-Man and the Wasp swap spots. We are in mid-July, Roth, but there's still, as I mentioned, Hotel Transylvania is going to be on that list. Whether it stays there, we'll see how well it plays. Mission Impossible opens in a couple of weeks. We'll see where that lands on the list. And of course, another movie that's opening later this summer. The most important
movie of the summer,
that may be on that list. Let's take a look at the number. Roth, we are just 25 days until the Meg.
Let me tell you something. We got a junket. I'll pull the curtain back a little bit. We got a junket invite, and it's happening the week after Comic-Con for the Meg. And you bet your happy little tookuses that I said yes.
Are we interviewing the Megalodon?
The Megalodon. I cannot. I don't want to get hurt, Dan. I think that's where I'm at with the Meg now. I just don't want to get hurt.
I don't either. We've been counting it down since before the summer. I can't believe we're just a shade over 3 weeks away.
Are you guys going to tune in with us? Are you going to go see the Meg and then come back here and talk to us about it immediately? I sure hope so.
I do,
We've been in this together.
Yeah. I believe Jacqueline Coley, who did our top 10 list this year, put the Meg on her top 10, and I applauded her at that time for having the guts to put it on her top 10 list, which I wanted to do also. I continue to applaud her, and I hope that I am proven wrong and she is proven right by the Meg. We'll see.
It all rests on if Jason Statham punches that megalodon.
Yes.
Just once in the face.
Giant size.
Just once.
Yeah. We need it.
It rests on that. We need that.
As a country, as a species.
We need that
We need Jason Statham to punch the megalodon in the face. Well, Roth, we'll find out in 25 days.
We will. We're going to Comic-Con this weekend. You guys should check us out. We will have coverage on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all of the con things. We will be there the whole time.
Yep. Thursday night, our panel.
Room
6 BCF. Please, it's the biggest room we've ever played, so please come see us
if
you're there. Come and say hi. It may just be us and you. I don't know.
That's
it's a big
okay.
room. That's fine too. You
just
can be the sole judge for movie fights.
Yeah.
It'll be great.
You've always wanted to judge us.
Yeah.
Come judge us in person.
Stop doing it silently at home and come do it in person at San Diego. It'll be fun.
We will be there. Check out our coverage. Come to our panel, and we will then see you the following Monday. That's right, folks. We'll be back right here.
Back here a week from today,
Monday
looking
afternoon.
much more tired than we do right now. Talking about, I didn't even write down what movies are coming out this week.
It's coming out this week.
Go find out.
All right.
We'll talk about it.